Unemployment is currently a great issue in today's economy.
The term being unemployed means that you don't have a job and are not able to earn income.
People who are unemployed have a harder time meeting financial obligations, therefore may fail to pay the mortgage or rent, which may lead to homelessness through foreclosure or eviction. Unemployment causes illness, malnutrition, mental stress, and loss of self-esteem, which can all lead to depression. Sometimes, even those who tend to be optimistic have a hard time seeing the bright side of things while unemployed. A recession is a period of temporary economic decline, during which trade and industrial activity are reduced, generally identified by a fall in GDP, or gross domestic product, in 2 successive quarters. The Deep Recession that began in December 2007 cost American workers nearly 7.5 million jobs before it officially ended in June 2009. Although men suffered 70% of the job losses, women had a tougher recovery. Between June 2009 and December 2011, men's overall unemployment rate declined from 9.9% to 8%. Meanwhile, women's overall unemployment rate increased from 7.6% to 7.9%. Women got left behind for 2 years of the recovery from the Deep Recession. Between June 2009 and December 2011, the economy added over 1.4 million jobs, and yet women only gained 3% of those jobs. Between June 2009 and May 2012, America added more than 2.5 million jobs.
Unemployed to me means you don't have a job, but you want one. I think if you don't have a job, but you don't want one, that's your choice. But there are a lot of people who want jobs, can't find them. Those are the ones I do consider unemployed.
I do know someone who was unemployed for a long period of time. She has found work today. She was laid off from a retailer where she was working, and she lived in Iceland, or still lives in Iceland, and she was able to get unemployment benefits for money, and she got support from her family and friends, and eventually she landed a new job.
The unemployment rate is expressed as a percentage. It is calculated as follows. The unemployment rate is the number of unemployed workers divided by the total labor force. The total labor force is the number of people employed and the number of people seeking employment in a country or region. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, between 1950 and 2013, the average unemployment rate in the U.S. varied from as low as 2.5% to as high as 10.8%. The male unemployment rate ranged from as low as 2.3% to as high as 11.2%, while the female unemployment rate ranged from 2.7% to 10.4%. Different states have different unemployment rates. Between the years 2000 and 2013, the state that had the lowest unemployment rate was Connecticut, going as low as 2.1%, while the highest was Michigan, going as high as 14.2%.
When I think unemployed, the first reaction I have is someone that doesn't have a job, that's not earning a paycheck, and can't pay their bills, and so that's going to provide stress in their life, perhaps put them in a position where they have to make sacrifices for their family, or eventually have to go homeless because they just don't have any means to support their life. But then I start to think not just someone without a job, without a paycheck, but what are they doing productive with their life? Is there something missed in their life where, hey, I have certain gifts to share with the world, and I'm not able to share those gifts with others that could bring meaning and purpose to my life and make the world a better place. So the word I think of is vocation. The word voco is a Latin word meaning call or calling or to call. And so what is my vocation in life? What do I feel called to do? Of course, we want to have a job so we can make money, provide for our family, and so we can eat, pay the bills. But there's something deeper there too. What can I contribute to the world, contribute to my family and friends and the world I live in?
The unemployment rate dropped to 8.1%, but only because so many discouraged job seekers gave up looking. A Rutgers University survey of workers who were laid off in 2008 finds that 36% of those people classify themselves as totally wrecked or devastated with a major change in lifestyle. They are not confident things will improve. 33% are feeling downsized, saying they had some lifestyle change and feel poor. 23% say they're on their way back. Only 7% say they were in good financial shape and were unscathed by the recession.
By some estimates, that rate, which translates to 15 million people, is actually closer to 20%, or 30 million people without a job. The Bureau of Labor Statistics conducts a survey of households to calculate the rate and considers people unemployed if they don't have a job, have actively looked for work in the prior 4 weeks, and are currently available for work. Among those not counted, college graduates who can't find their first job, those who haven't sent out a resume in more than 4 weeks, and those who simply would never be surveyed because they don't have a landline or a permanent residence.
The stock market got so full with certain investments that just the bubble burst.
One of the worst recessions in the world is known as the Great Depression. Officially starting on October 29, 1929, the Great Depression had devastating effects to the whole world, no matter if a country was rich or poor. In the United States, October 29, 1929 is called Black Tuesday, which is the day when the New York Stock Exchange crashed, marking the beginning of the Great Depression. People who had borrowed a great amount of money to buy stocks that were high-priced went bankrupt. A few banks were forced to close after the stock market crashed, causing people to panic. Afraid to lose their own savings, they withdrew all their money, causing more banks to close. Those who did not reach their bank in time became bankrupt. Businesses and industries also lost a lot in the stock market crash and the bank closures, so they had to start cutting back on their workers' wages or hours, which meant that consumers had to stop buying many luxury items. The lack of these purchases forced companies to cut even more wages from workers or having them laid off. Even with all these cuts, a lot of businesses had to close, leaving all their workers unemployed. The unemployment rate increased to 33% and may have been higher since the government was not able to keep track of everyone. People who still had small incomes bought their food and other things on credit. Advertisers used the slogan, "Buy now, pay later," to get them to buy more items. Many people ended up with so much debt they were not able to buy anymore, slowing down the manufacturing of items even more. During other bad recessions, farmers were usually fine because they could grow food for themselves. However, during the Great Depression, the Great Plains were hit hard with both drought and atrocious dust storms. The effects of drought, combined with years and years of overgrazing, caused the grass to disappear, leaving just loose dirt. High winds picked up the dirt and carried it for miles. These dust storms destroyed almost all the remaining crops, along with almost everything in their path. Small farmers were affected greatly. They were already in debt before the Great Depression, since the invention of the tractor decreased the need for manpower on farms. They had been borrowing money for seeds and paying it back by selling the crops. When the dust storms hit, Not only were the small farmers unable to feed themselves and their families, but they could not pay back their debts, resulting in the banks taking away their farms, leaving the farmers and their families unemployed and homeless.
So when I think about the Great Depression, I think about America. These times in Iceland, which is my country, that was a very different time. Iceland was a very poor country at the time, but in the 1930s was actually sort of the start of better times in Iceland. So when I think about Great Depression, I think about American families. I think about American families losing their homes, splitting up because our parents need to find a job in another town, and that sort of thing.
Since millions of people lost their jobs in the U.S. during the Great Depression, there were very few openings for jobs. Many people who were unable to find a job locally went away, traveling from place to place looking for work. Most hitchhiked or rode the rails. A majority of people who rode the rails were teenagers, but there were also men, women, and even families who traveled that way. They would travel to different places hoping to find work. If there happened to be a job opening, there would be thousands of people applying for the same job. Those who didn't get a job would stay in a shantytown. Housing in these shantytowns were made out of anything that was available to them, ranging from driftwood to newspaper. The U.S. entered the Great Depression under the presidency of Herbert Hoover. Therefore, many people blamed him for the economic crisis. Shantytowns were called Hoovervilles. Newspapers became known as Hoover blankets. Pant pockets that were turned inside out to show they were empty were called Hoover flags. And broken down cars being pulled by horses were known as Hoover wagons. In the 1932 presidential election, Herbert Hoover did not stand a chance for re-election against Franklin D. Roosevelt. To many people back then, Franklin D. Roosevelt was considered a hero. Many believed he was the reason that the Great Depression ended. Looking at all the facts, people now believe that President Roosevelt may not have had that much to do with the ending of the Great Depression, although he did help ease the hardships of the Great Depression. The major turnaround for the economy happened after Pearl Harbor was bombed and the U.S. entered World War II. People in industry were essential in the war effort. Women kept the factories going, men were trained to be soldiers, and food was needed for the soldiers overseas and for the women in the factories. The length of the Great Depression varied depending on each individual country, but overall it lasted about 10 to 15 years. Ultimately, the entrance into World War II by the United States is what ended the Great Depression in the U.S.
Also, the things that come to mind is just kind of history books of, you think of long food lines. I think of black and white pictures of people who really look like they're hungry, people who have tattered clothes and they have a little cutout begging for money.
So I am a statistician and an academic, and in academia these days it is very hard to find a job, and it has become harder after the recession a few years ago. More and more academics are doing temporary work like postdocs before they actually land a permanent job. But on the other hand, statisticians have it actually easy finding jobs. There's a big demand for statisticians.
Unemployment in different countries ranges from as low as 0.5% in Qatar, which is a country in the Middle East, bordering the Persian Gulf and Saudi Arabia, to as high as 90% in Nauru, which is a small island in the South Pacific. The unemployment rate for Canada is 7.3%. In Germany, it is 5.4%. In Russia, it is 6.4%. And in Japan, it is 4.5%. Even if the percent is lower, it may not mean there are less people who don't have a job. For example, in the United Kingdom, the unemployment rate is 8.1%, which means that around 5 million people are unemployed, while the unemployment rate in China is 4.1%, and yet around 55 million people are unemployed there. The early 1980s recession was a severe global economic recession, affecting much of the developed world. From an unemployment rate of 5.6% in May 1979, by April 1980 the rate had gone up to 6.9%, and then after only 1 month got to 7.5%. The peak of the recession was in November and December of 1982, when the unemployment rate got up to 10.8%, the highest since the Great Depression. In September 1982, Michigan had the highest unemployment rate of 14.5%. In the spring of 1983, 30 states had double-digit unemployment rates, with West Virginia's unemployment rate hitting 20.1%. Over the years, there have been a great number of recessions. Most of them are not very well known, but they have all affected a profuse amount of people, and in turn those people have lost their jobs. Even though no one wants unemployment, it is something that is unavoidable.